The Bible contains an enigmatic set of laws about a house that becomes afflicted and somehow needs to be cured. To our surprise, some rabbis tell us this isn't a punishment at all. It's a blessing in disguise. Because when the walls are broken open, the homeowner discovers treasures hidden betוך, הקיר, inside of the wall. Looking at the images coming out of Israel after the recent war with Iran, buildings ripped apart, homes exposed, walls torn open to the world, we feel anguish and wonder whether these ancient texts can provide any guidance, hope, or solace. In this episode, we are joined by the rabbis of the Talmud, modern-day archaeologists, and even a trailblazing Israeli artist, all who see the need and benefits of exploring the secrets hidden in our walls. Welcome to Madlik. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on your favorite podcast platform and now on YouTube and Substack. We also publish a source sheet on Sefaria, and a link is included in the show notes. This week we read Parshat Tazria Metzora. It contains the strange laws of biblical leprosy, tsarat, of the skin, of garments, and even houses. So join us for When Homes Are Torn Open. Well, Rabbi, welcome back from Scotland. It sounds like you went from castle to castle, and you must have seen a few walls yourselves. Maybe they were needing renovations.
I would imagine that there were treasures inside those walls. We didn't break them open, but I'm sure there were treasures there.
Treasures, secrets. You can only imagine what those walls have heard, right?
That is for sure.
So here we are back in Vayikra. We took a few episodes off to get into our favorite subject matter, the Haggadah. We're in Leviticus 14, and this is after, as I said in the intro, God discusses this enigmatic leprosy, tsarat, starting with on the skin, then going into clothing, and now we're at the last kind of rung or use case for this leprosy, this tsarat. God spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, "When you enter the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, and I inflict an eruptive plague upon a house in the land you possess, ki tavo el haaretz Canaan asher ani noten lachem la'achuza, v'natati negat tsarat bebeit eretz achuzatchem." So that is full of so many kind of conditions and explanations that we haven't found in the other instances of this leprosy. There it talks about if your skin is all white, if it has a hair. It more describes the tsarat itself. Here it almost seems like conditional, and our good buddy Rashi picks right up on it. He says, when you come to the land, I will put the plague of leprosy. This was an announcement to them that these plagues would come upon them because the Amorites concealed treasures of gold in the walls of their houses. During the whole 40 years the Israelites were in the wilderness, in order that these might not possess them when they conquered Palestine. And in consequence of the plague, they would pull down the house and discover them. I had never really focused on this before, Rabbi, but it certainly seems to be that it's a little bit of a kind of exactly the opposite, a pump fakert, v'nahapachu, to what you would expect, because there seems to be benefits.
You say it's surprising. You know, they look at these laws of tsarat, of leprosy, and they need to make it positive. So they twist it to get a positive out of it.
But correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes to getting tzorat of your skin or even your clothes, I mean, I was actually surprised how almost universal the explanation was that it had to do with speaking lashon hora, speaking badly of others. It was a punishment. This is a case of when bad things happen to people who are doing something wrong. And that's why it's even more surprising that the rabbis, at least these rabbis, went out of their way to make this seem as though it was there was a good side to it. There was a benefit. In the Vayikra Rabbah that Rashi quotes, it actually says Basura hilahem. Basura by itself, I guess, means we normally say Basura tova, but certainly,
Right. I was going to say Metzora usually is positive, I think.
yeah. And of course, the commentator or the translator says this is a glad tiding to them that
It's
plague
interesting that the word
spots.
glad is in parentheses. I wonder what that's all about.
Well, because I think it's missing Basura Tova.
Right.
And I think if we're going to, it just dawned on me as we're speaking, a surah actually means more of a message. There is a message here, and they turned it into a good message. But I think maybe the direction that we're going to be going is that there clearly was a surah, a message here. The rabbis in Vayikra said, and it is written, I will place a mark of leprosy. Rabbi Chia taught, is this good tidings for them, that leprosy will befall them? He's asking a question. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai taught, when the Canaanites heard that Israel was coming upon them, they arose and concealed their money in the houses and in the fields. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, I promised their ancestors, meaning the ancestors of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, that I will take their descendants into a land full of everything good, as it is stated in Deuteronomy, houses full of everything good. What does the Holy One, blessed be he, do? He brings leprosy into one's house, and the owner demolishes it and finds the concealed cachet within. So really, they go out of their way to say not only is it going to be a land of milk and honey, but they find a verse that says houses full of everything good. But again, we're starting, the word naga is very similar to the word of plagues that were on the Egyptians. And I'm wondering if that was kind of one of the things that maybe piqued their creativity, where they said the plague was on the house, but not necessarily upon the Jew living in it. But it is just fascinating. And of course, like anything like this, Rabbi, you wonder whether there was a pre-existent tradition or whether there was a problem here that this was meant to address.
Yeah, well, that's the question, right? What, that's what we always were taught. What's bothering Rashi? What's the problem here?
So I think if we go back to the pasuk, it actually says, tavo ala aretz. So first of all, it's not clear that the other incidences of tzorat are what we call mitzvah hatluya ba'aretz, that they are dependent on being in the land of Israel. You could make a case, Rabbi, that you could be living in Babylonia and you could develop this skin condition. You'd travel to the Kohen in Israel and you'd get it diagnosed. There's nothing about those laws that say they're tuluyot ba'aretz. But here it does clearly say the land of Canaan. Even more so, it talks when you enter the land of Canaan. So I think that made them. And then it goes further, and it says when it is your possession. So we're going to see that the rabbis really are kind of struck by all of these conditions. And then it says, and I inflict eruptive plague. That's the translation that we have in Atati Negat Sarat. I don't know. It certainly, Negat, has the concept of a plague upon the house. And again, it gets back to Eretz achuzatchem, the land you possess. So I think the rabbis, if we had to ask what was causing this kind of surprising turn, certainly there are enough words in this verse to strike us as interesting or strange.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. And you have to go back to the fact that the very idea of tsarat is so strange, right? I mean, the fact that there's a disease in the Torah, and that, when you get the disease, you go to the priest, you go to the Kohen. Instead of going to the doctor, you go to the Kohen. And if it comes back, you go back to the Kohen. It's like you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, if you're not better in 2 weeks, come back to me. So the same thing with the Kohen. The Kohen says, here's what I see now, and if you're not better in a week, come back to me. So this is really a story about pre-penicillin medicine, and how they dealt with illness that they didn't really understand, so they put it in kind of religious terms.
But of course, here it's not so religious, because it doesn't seem, we're going to find out in a few seconds, that there were commentaries who saw it as a punishment, a spiritual type of thing. But if you follow the train of the rabbis that we've just picked up on, thanks to Rashi, it was almost a reward. It was a basura tova. The Eben Ezra says as follows: V'natati. He was struck by the language of that I will give you. Hadavar talui b'netinat Hashem. So what he's saying is, since it is contingent upon going into the land that God will give us, there must be something positive about this. And he says, and it must be based on providence. Getting back to what this actually is, I think the consensus, Rabbi, you would agree with me, we're talking about some sort of mold, which we moderns can associate with. If you ever know somebody who has a house that has mold, it's very difficult to get rid of.
And also, by the way, it's white. So the whole thing that, you see white, and it's the same white that's the white of this tsarat. By the way, it's not really leprosy, because leprosy is not white. Leprosy, disforms you. That's why they had leper colonies and leper hospitals. But it probably is closer to what we call today psoriasis, some kind of skin disease that turned white. So absolutely right. The mold is right in line with what we're talking about.
I mean, in the previous verses where it does talk about this quote unquote leprosy of the body, it does have that sense of when you walk through the street, somebody calls in front of you that here comes this person with this disease. So there definitely is some social disgrace, and there is this sense of it's contagious. But let's continue with the house. So the Sifra says as follows: then he shall raise the house. So what we haven't really gotten into is what the Kohen does. And as you said before, he comes, he pokes around, he says, let's wait a week. He comes back, he sees if it's gone away. They remove some stones. And at the end of the day, if they can't get rid of it, they do rip down the house or rip down the wall. But in our verses, it says, then he shall raise the house, its stones, its wood, and all the mortar of the house. So says the Sifrei, the Midrash, we are hereby taught that a house is not subject to plague spot uncleanliness unless there be in it stones, wood, and mortar. And so some of the commentaries point out here, this is why it had to be in the land of Israel, because in the desert, they lived in tents. But again, it was fascinating to me, given the direction that the rabbis went in terms of finding things inside of your walls. That would only happen if you have stones, wood, or mortar, I think.
I think that's right.
The Chizkuni, a later commentary, says as follows: when you will come to the land of Canaan, a different explanation, the reason why when a plague breaks out on a house it must be destroyed is that the earth of the land of Israel is holy, and its earth does not gladly suffer ritual contamination. So there still is this element of why only in the land of Israel. The Midrash that we studied was Canaanite it's hiding things in it, but clearly there is this level of getting to some level of purity. The Kli Yakar says, when you come to the land of Canaan, which I am giving you as a possession, when it says, and I will place a plague of leprosy in a house of the land of your possession, it should have simply said in your houses. Why does it say in the houses of the land of your possession? So he says, according to Rashi's explanation that the Amorites hid treasures, this is not a difficulty because it specifies your possession to exclude houses that the Israelites would build there, which would not relate to this reason. So as they would say in the yeshiva, there's a halachic difference here. If Rashi is correct, then if you built a new house, you wouldn't have to go look for tzurat. It must not be tzurat.
Right, that's interesting. You're right. I mean, he kind of plays with the midrashic idea to teach you a law, which is fantastic.
But again, it focuses on the fact that whether there are treasures or secrets hidden in the walls, it has to be a house that has a history. If you built it last week, or even a year or two or three ago, if it's new construction that you built, maybe according to this understanding, there is no law of tzurat. And I think that this focus on a history is fascinating in terms of what the rabbis bring. I was talking to you before the show about walking through Scotland and going into these old castles and, what those walls would say. Because we do have a phrase in if these walls could talk. It's an English phrase. I did a little bit of research, and it's first found in the 19th century. Variants of the conceit asking what objects would say if they could speak appear in English literature and periodicals in the 1800s. But Rabbi, there is a sense that whether the walls can talk, whether they have ears, or whether there is a history in them, I think that's what fascinated me about this midrash, that the midrash captured the sense that you were being, I guess, compelled to get into the history of those walls somehow.
Yeah, I mean, that's great, the idea of if the walls could talk. If the walls could talk, if you knew what was behind every wall, right? We also have the idea, what's behind the wall, what's in the hidden compartments. Somehow somehow walls, hide things from us.
And of course, that would be the knee-jerk connection to tzuras of the body, because everybody, as I said before, associates tzurat with lashon hara, about speaking badly of somebody. It would be very easy to say that the walls have ears and they are the first place that they're going to hear your lashon hara. And the Birkat Asher actually says, one who speaks lashon hara, first the walls of his house begin to change. If he repents, the house is purified. If he persists in his wickedness until the house must be demolished, then the leather items, then it gets to your skin. So he connects them all. But again, what I'm starting to argue is that the two are not that far apart. Because if your walls have history, they have history that you've created, and maybe they have prehistory before you moved into the house. But the walls have ears, we are going to say on Madlik, is much older than the 16th century. Clearly, the concept of your walls have ears goes back to the rabbinic period where they associated tzurat of a house, of a wall, to lashon hara and what those walls might have heard.
Fantastic. That is really fantastic.
And now, a word from our sponsor. If there's one thing we value at Matlik Podcast, it's reading texts and talking about them. That's why I'm excited to share something I created called Voice Gift Play. It fits in the palm of your hand like a remote control and clips onto any book. It's inspired by those old school museum audio guides, but this is personal. Voice Gift Play stores up to 10 hours of audio across 999 numbered recordings. You simply enter a number to record a comment, memory, or explanation, and enter the same number to play it back. It's perfect for B'nai Mitzvah practicing their laning, capturing Grandpa's favorite tune, or recording Chad Gad Yar in a voice that matters. Go to voice.gift. That's www.voice.gift and use code MADLIK for 15% off. Thanks. And now back to our podcast. So now I said in the intro, we're going to talk about archaeology. There is a word in archaeology, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's called spolia. And spolia from the Latin for spoils, meaning to think things that were cast away. And we've had another episode where we talked about found art or found objects. So spolia are stones taken from an old structure and repurposed for new construction or decorative purposes. It is the result of an ancient and widespread practice, spoliation, whereby stone that has been quarried, cut, and used in a built structure is carried away to be used somewhere else. The practice is of particular interest to historians, archaeologists, and architectural historians, since the gravestones, monuments, and architectural fragments of antiquity are frequently found embedded in structures built centuries or millennia later. You find this on horoscopes, correct? Where the Arabs took tombstones from Jewish homes and from Jewish graves, and they used them for building. It's almost like those ancient books that Sharon gets to, where sometimes they bound a book with paper from another book. They repurposed.
Sharon has an amazing thing. She found a Samaritan 10 Commandments, and they found it. An Arab had used it as a stone in their front, in the entrance way of their house. And only then they realized there actually were the 10 Commandments on it. It's exactly what you're describing. That's great. She's going to love this.
So again, I found a whole study from a city in the ancient Near East where it's all about this spolia. And it says, and I wanted to bring it up to current state of the art, originally regarded as not deserving much attention and seen as simply epitomizing the decline of urban communities, reused architectural and sculptural elements are now generally considered important pieces of evidence to shed light on building processes. Besides these structural functions, reused material could be used for aesthetic or ideological reasons. So what I'm trying to argue, Rabbi, is I'm taking the license to look at what the rabbis thought about of people living in Canaan were hiding things. But again, it's a bigger story. It's the story of coming to a home and finding a history there and discovering something about your predecessors and maybe something about yourself. So I did a little comparison here between an archaeologist and a Cohen. It says the Cohen sees discoloration in the wall. The archaeologist notices a structural anomaly. The Cohen orders the house emptied. The archaeologist clears the site. The Cohen scrapes or removes stones. The archaeologists excavate layers. If needed, the Cohen dismantles the house. The archaeologist conducts a controlled demolition. The Cohen reveals what is בתוך הקיר, what's inside of the wall, and the archaeologist reveals artifacts בתוך הקיר. It's a
That
funny
is
way.
fantastic.
So it's really, the Midrash becomes radical if you look at it this way. And so the plague is not a destruction, it is a gift. And it's diagnostic. It's kind of an excavation, just like archaeology. You don't discover the past by preserving the wall, you discover it by breaking it open. And these foreign materials show, they raise moral questions. They raise questions about yourself, unresolved ownership, moral residue, otherness embedded in Tocha the Bayit. It becomes something that is fascinating, especially, Rabbi, if we listen to the Kli Yakar and we say, this doesn't work in new construction. This is only... So you cannot live in a house that doesn't have a history in it. And the foreign materials can show all sorts of things. Past wealth is where the Midrash takes us. But you cannot live in a house without confronting what it contains. Just like spolia, the walls are never neutral. They are composed of prior lives. And it just opens up a whole new way of looking at what even in the Bible is clearly a process. The person who owns the house is going through a transformation as this happens. And it's why only in Israel? Because holiness in the Torah is not escape. You could say it's intensification. This is our land. And I've always argued that the brilliance of our Torah, especially when you get into these debates about colonialism and all that, is first of all, we recognize there were refugees, there were movements of people. But the Torah never neglected the fact, it advertised the fact that we came, we might have left the land and gone to Egypt, we came into the land again, there were other people there. It becomes part of taking possession. You don't just move in, you have to reckon.
Right.
Biblical
Well,
leprosy of houses is not about disease, it's about a historical consciousness, especially as
well, I would say
relates.
conquest is a big deal in the Torah, right? The fact that they conquered the land of Israel. They took the people who were there and they took over their houses and they took over their cities. So this very much fits into that.
Yeah, and it can be something that's a gift, and it can be something that's a challenge. So I wanted to segue to an Israeli artist named Ilit Azulay, and I actually have one of her paintings. It's a photograph, and I'm showing it on the screen right now. And everything that she does, Rabbi, she associates the story behind objects. And what she noticed, she used to pass by demolition sites in New Tel Aviv, and she found out that when they building in the 40s, the 30s, and the 40s, construction materials were very scarce. So if there was a button factory next door or a factory that had surplus material, they would mix that into the cement. And just as Sharon could find artifacts within a book cover, you could find artifacts of the Chalutzim and the life they lived only 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. And what happened was she went to a brutalist structure. I'm showing it here on Zichron Yaakov. And Rabbi, this is the only time in my life that I had a visceral experience inside of a building. My wife said we were going to a new opera hall, and it was in Zichron Yaakov. And I picture Zichron Yaakov as vistas of seeing out in the beautiful vista of Israel. We got inside, Rabbi, there wasn't a window in the structure. They call that brutalist. They call that brutalist. And if it sounds brutal, it is. And so I just happened to have that in my mind, and I couldn't get out soon enough. And so when I went to this, I really don't know what happened to me. But when I came to this artist and I said, we bought this painting from you 2 years ago, could you describe it? She told me it comes from that building. And she says that building was originally built as a place for a sanitarium. And then after the Yom Kippur War, they did interrogations of soldiers who were captured. And then it became a concert hall. It had a whole history. And in the photo that I bought, she was peeling away the different levels of it. There's a Hieronymus Bosch on the right, which might have been part of when it was a rehabilitation center. But she kind of opened up my eyes to a modern day house that had Surat, house that had stories in it. And there was a show at the Jewish Museum where all she had on the wall were objects, found objects, and you would put on a headset and you would listen to the story behind each object. So this really is a kind of continuation of what what we discussed in a prior episode when we talked about found objects. But clearly, there is this sense that she has brought to the fore that maybe in every country, every wall has a story, but certainly in Israel, where you only have to dig just a little bit below the surface and you come to different strata of Byzantine or Roman or other types of layers. Also in the walls, there are all sorts of stories heard. And I think as we conclude, if you think about what happened and what is happening today in Israel and the pictures, on the one hand, I was in a building in Bat Yam that was hit by a missile 6 months ago. And what was striking to me was, on the one hand, how the feeling of anguish in seeing people's belongings scattered all over. And then I saw the miklat. And Rabbi, there wasn't a piece of paint missing from the miklat. It was on the same floor. So on the one hand, when we see what the destruction is, we can be proud of the fact that the state of Israel invested so much time, effort, coding in protecting its citizens. But I think also there are so many stories that have to be preserved in the buildings, in these buildings. And I think if you do go back and you start finding those buttons and those surplus manufactured goods, you realize that this wasn't the first time that our people have gone through trouble, that we have had to live by our wits, to be opportunistic. And I think as desperate as you might feel when you look at your beautiful city of Tel Aviv, or in the south or in the north, I think there is a little bit of Besura Tova, that we can potentially not only preserve the stories of those who were before us, but also the fact that they had hope and they had resilience, and that they built those houses against great odds as well. I think there are stories there. That's my takeaway from the Tzorat
That's
of the
beautiful.
house.
That's amazing connection from this idea of Tzarat. That's beautiful. That's great. Enjoy the parsha, everybody. This is also Rosh Chodesh Tov to everybody this weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Achrei Mot, a whole new story. Thank you, Jeffrey.
And I hope to make it. And if I do, I will be in Portugal. So you never know.
Oh,
See
my
if we
goodness.
can pull that
Okay.
off. All the best. Shabbat Shalom. See you all next week.